For my lesson, I decided to focus on resolving conflicts and identifying harmful ways of relating. This would be for grade 10. For an hour-long lesson, I made up the times from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Basically, students are going to work in small groups to create a skit in which they depict a conflict that might arise when one of these harmful relationships is taking place. So this is the standard that I was assigned. It's 4C, use conflict resolution skills. And for the objective, I want to see that students are able to identify the types of harmful relationships during group role play and discussion 8 out of 10 times. I'll also be looking for the way that they show that the conflict is resolved. So these are some of the big ideas that come into this lesson. What are harmful ways of relating? Can you define the conflict? What type of harmful ways of relating do you think you see? How could each party take responsibility for their actions? And how can they agree on a solution? This lesson would build on previous lessons that the students have already had about how to resolve conflicts. So in their skits, they're going to be able to show the different harmful ways of relating, but use what they already know about resolving conflicts to explain that part of it. This is some important vocabulary that students will need to know in order to participate in this lesson. They'll need to know the definition of a relationship, and they'll also need to know the difference between healthful relationships and harmful relationships. This is a list of materials that the students will need in order to participate in the lesson. So they'll need their class notes just for extra help and support if they need that, as well as their textbooks. They'll also need a paper and a pencil. Each group will have a timer to monitor the amount of time that the skit is, because we don't want it to be longer than 3 minutes. And I will also pass out a guidelines for the skit paper. So for the first 10 minutes of class, we'll kind of just define each of the harmful types of relationships, and I'll write them on the board with these simple definitions. And this will come in handy later when we perform the skits, because it'll kind of serve as a word bank, because the other students will be guessing what type of harmful relationship the group who's performing the skit is depicting. So the next 10 minutes of class will kind of just consist of breaking the students into groups of about 3 or 4. Preferably 4 groups would be good, maybe 5 if there's enough students. Each group will be assigned one of the types of harmful relationships, but the rest of the class won't know what the other groups have. And I'll explain to them that their task is to create a skit that's about 3 minutes long, where they're going to think of a conflict, and then they're going to show how you would resolve that conflict. So for the next 20 minutes or so, the groups will begin to create their skits. I will have passed out a set of guidelines that they can follow just to keep them on track. And as students work together, I would encourage them to spread out. Maybe some of them will go in the hallway, just so what each group has will stay just between the group, and not so the other students won't know what it is for the purposes of guessing later. I'll also remind students that they should focus more on the resolution in their skit instead of setting up the conflict. The conflict could kind of just serve more as backstory. So, for example, if they were assigned the controller, they could just start out their skit by saying, in this skit, we're going to depict a friendship between two people where one person prefers for the other friend to not really make friends with anybody else and wants them to do what they want them to do all the time. And they just tend to be very jealous and domineering of the other friend. And then after they kind of just set that up, they can explain how they're going to resolve that issue. So for the rest of the time of the class, the students will perform their skits. After each skit, I'm going to ask the class, what type of harmful relationship did we just see? So this would help me check for their understanding. I would see if they could correctly identify what they just saw, and I would also see that the group correctly was able to explain through their skit that type of harmful relationship. If there is any additional time remaining, we can have a class discussion where I'll ask questions like, what type of relationships do you think are common among your age group? Or have you ever dealt with any of these types of relationships and how did you deal with it? For homework, the students are going to be asked to write a short response where they describe an experience that they may have had with one of these harmful relationships that we just talked about in class. And if they're not comfortable sharing a personal relationship, then they can write about one maybe that they saw on a TV show or read about in a book. And in the response, I would look for them to explain how the conflict was resolved or how they think it should have been resolved based off of the conflict resolution skills that we would be talking about in class and building on with lessons like this.